Right, so at the end of the last episode, we had the radiator mounted and we were starting to look at how we were going to mount the intercooler. So what we've done is weld a plate on top of the radiator, which we've kind of got some holes in either side, and then put some tabs on the bottom of the intercooler. So just weld some simple tabs onto the bottom of the intercooler, and then kind of drilled and nut and bolted them through. That won't be kind of permanent. What we'll do is we'll swap that nut out for nut cert. Once we're 100%, this is where the intercooler is going to live, and we can be sure that we're not going to change it at all. So because the intercooler is just a plain core, as we've had to fabricate some end tanks for it. So again, that makes it a little bit tricky to mount it and design what kind of end tanks you want. It's hard to know exactly how big and what shape the end tanks need to be until you've got the intercooler mounted. But usually, or a lot of the time, you would mount the intercooler off the end tanks. So it's a case of having to make something up which, again, gets us started, and then we can move a little bit further along, fabricate end tanks, weld end tanks on, and then the top of the intercooler will be fixed from the end tank to where the slam panel would be. So obviously I said we were going to put some blanks in here. We'll then have a mount from the end tank up to the crash bar, and then that'll keep this whole thing nice and solid. Fabricating of the end tanks is pretty easy. We start off with a cardboard pattern. Then what we'll do is we'll kind of disassemble the cardboard, cut through the tape, fold it all out, make sure we mark which side is going to be the face side of the intercooler, so that the face side of the end tank, so that when we kind of reassemble it, all of the angles match up. We don't get any of these pieces the wrong way around. And then I mark on each joint a number. So I would have 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3, so that when I come to reassemble it, it's super easy to know which edge goes where and how it all joins together. And then just a case of welding it up. So we've got the offside end tank cardboard pattern made now. So again, we'll just mark it up, face sides, the numbers of all the edges, then transfer it onto a piece of sheet. Go cut it out in the bandsaw, clean all the edges up, and then it's a case of tacking it and welding it together. Right, so we've now got 2 end tanks welded up and ready to go. So now it's a case of attaching them to the sides of the intercooler. So to start with, we'll just tack them on, because we're going to use these for some mounts as well to the slam panel. Normally I would want to go ahead and cut the holes in the backs of these for the turbo outlet and then out into the throttle body. But because of how tight this side's going to be, we might need to do some kind of angle cut pipe work. I'm not sure if it's exactly going to come into the back there. I'm hopeful it will, so that it's a nice flow. But until we start cutting up pipe, it's quite hard to tell. So what we're going to do is just tack the end tanks on for now, and then we will work out exactly where we're going to cut the holes later. Then we'll cut the end tanks back off again, cut the holes out, and then weld them on properly. Okay, so we've now got the end tanks tacked on, and we can now see that the front end is starting to come together a bit more. And this is the point where we can now look at fixing the top of the intercooler to these the kind of ends of the slam panel. So we're going to need to look at capping those off, and we can also now start thinking about the boost pipe work. This side's obviously going to be quite tight, this side's going to be nice and easy, It's just going to be, you know, a bend out of here, up and then around into the throttle body. What we've also got to be mindful of is this coolant line here. So our ducting is going to sit inside of the radiator and then widen off to fit inside of the intercooler. So we need to leave enough room for the coolant hose. So we've got this fit in, which is about the right angle, but to try and stay as close to the bottom of the radiator as possible, what we're going to have to do is kind of cut across this outlet a little bit. So we're going to kind of weld our boss on there at a bit of an angle, and that's just going to leave us with a piece of hose in there. So that'll be perfect for that side, and it'll still leave us with enough room to kind of get our ducting on there. Whether we end up welding it to the back of the radiator or bolting it back, not quite sure yet. We'll probably get it made up, and then we need to make it so that we can actually disassemble parts of this. And again, this is where it becomes quite hard to imagine until you've kind of built it. We need to make sure that we can strip this car down if we need to. You know, if for anything breaks or anything needs repairing, if it gets crashed, we'll need to be able to strip it down. So we need to make sure that everything kind of disassembles properly. So yeah, it's now into boost pipe work and this ducting. So it's probably easy to take a quick look at the ducting first and then take a look at the boost pipe work and see how it's all going to work. So what we're looking at here is trying to get this kind of rear radiator scoop or duct big enough to take the two oil cooler cores, gearbox and engine oil coolers. Now obviously the intercooler is a little bit wider than the radiator, so that's a little bit of a challenge in itself, because wanted to try and make the scoop only as wide as the radiator core itself, not including the end tanks. And then we've also got to try and, or would like to try and get the oil cooler cores in the sides, and there's a turbo kind of in the way on this side. So I'm not saying in the way, we can figure out a solution here, but we just need to work out how it'll fit. So yeah, we've got the kind of shape of the side of it that I'd like it to be. I'd kind of like it to be about this shape, but that doesn't really give us much room to mount this oil cooler core. Now the gearbox oil cooler is probably not going to be that big. We can get away with a much smaller gearbox oil cooler, but I was just kind of overestimating. So on this side, you know, we can get that in no problem. We've not got turbo in the way. We can mount it as high or as low, or even at an angle if we wanted, wherever we want it really. But this side, it is seeming as though it's going to be a bit of a challenge to try and get it all in. So we need to do a bit more thinking and try and work out what will be a nice shape, enough volume, and then enough area here for an outlet to a oil cooler core, which we can then feed off back through the wheel arch. We've done a couple of revisions and we're now somewhere close to what these kind of end plates will look like. So when that's in here, we kind of start off at the bottom of the radiator, and then it'll kind of widen out to match up to the slightly wider intercooler core, and then we're going to leave it obviously flush with the top of the bonnet. This is probably going to be a bit short now, but I think there'll be a kind of piece fixed in the bonnet which comes down to mate up with this. I think that's probably a better way of doing it, rather than trying to make this perfectly match up with the height of the bonnet, given that the bonnet's got loads of weird internal contours. If we kind of have this finish off at a set height, and then the bonnet, another section of bonnet kind of closes down into this like a kind of secondary scoop, it's probably getting really confusing. It's confusing enough for me, so we're just going to have to do it and kind of show you how it works out really. Okay, so we've got the radiator off the car and welded just some pieces of flat on, which are going to basically bolt these side pieces to, and we've got our final cardboard pattern. So that's basically going to bolt on the sides like this, and it'll flare out to match the intercooler, the extra width of the intercooler. So now it's a case of cutting 2 of these out exactly the same, bolting them on either side as symmetrical as we can get them, and then kind of folding a sheet to go on the back towards the same radius as this up, to kind of almost to the bonnet height. Right, so we've now got both of those side pieces cut out, the back piece all bent up and tacked on. Again, it still looks pretty rough at the minute, it's still in its kind of raw form. All the welds are just tacked because we don't know if we might come up against some kind of problem further down the line, means we have to change this. So that's why at the minute we're still kind of doing everything as if it was like half temporary. We're as certain as we can be that we're going to stick with this, but it's far easier just to have a big weld session right at the end, when you know you're not going to change anything, than waste time welding something up that you end up chopping out or changing or whatever. So yeah, this basically just bolts straight on onto the top, in between those 2 plates, and slots in, and we've got with 2 nuts. Again, these will be changed to like nylock nuts when we actually do a final assembly, but these are a lot quicker to work with when you're just taking it apart every 5 minutes. So we've still got the protective film on the back of here for now. I don't know if this will get powder coated or not yet. Probably not. We'll probably just leave this as is. We might just put like a bit of a brushed finish on it. Again, there's kind of not really much point in powder coating this. Again, it's a racing car, so it doesn't necessarily matter too much on that surface finish and how it looks. It's more about making something that works. It will get scratched, it will be worked on, probably in a rush a lot of the time, so we don't really need to worry too much about making sure that it's as aesthetic as maybe like a product we'd make to sell. This is obviously purely a custom one-off job. So hopefully now on the bench you can kind of see a bit more of how this will work, and the shape of it before we put it on the car. So obviously the air will come through the radiator and then be forced out the top of the bonnet. So yeah, put it on the car. It's getting pretty heavy. So we're now at a point where to get the radiator on and off we have to remove the bumper mount. So obviously we've removed that. So we've got to put this back on. Which is a bit tricky to do with one hand. So when you start to kind of reassemble it, or you can start to, it starts getting quite exciting because you can see the idea that you've visualized start to, end in almost like a final product. It's obviously it's still got a lot of parts missing, but you can now kind of see the concept and the idea come to life a little bit. It's not just a piece of cardboard anymore, it's an actual thing. So there we have it. That's the kind of rear portion of the duct started as such. Obviously there's still a lot of bits to finish off. We've got a lot of gaps. We're going to have a piece on top of the intercooler, which is going to form a kind of grill. Because obviously as the bonnet comes down, the bonnet sits perfectly on top of the intercooler, but we need to then, again, make sure that that's nice and smoothed off. We don't want obviously big holes between the headlamp and the intercooler core to fill up the engine bay with air. It's going to cause drag. We need it to all be as nicely sealed off as possible. But now that we've got this rear piece in, again, it gives you a bit more to focus on. There's a bit more to visualise in the engine bay, and we can start working on a few more parts and coming up with more ideas. So really the next thing to start working on is sorting out some upper intercooler mounts onto these slam panels, because again, there's a bit of weight in this thing now, so it's all starting to get a bit wobbly. So we need to figure that out. And then some boost pipes. What I have done is I've already shortened off this fitting onto the thermostat housing and welded that up. So we've got a lot of boost pipe clearance. So that's now as low as we can get it. And that'll come down onto that fitting at the bottom here with just a short piece of hose. And then we can start thinking about the turbo intake. So the boost pipe on this side, which is going to be pretty tight. And again, the other coolant line off of the radiator. And then obviously we're going to have a big kind of letterbox cutout in the bonnet. So at the minute, obviously this is quite a bit short of the bonnet. So what we'll end up with is basically like a portion of the bonnet which slots into here, or on the outside, or whatever works, rather than trying to make this the same height as the bonnet exactly. Then you'll need like rubber seals, and again it gets quite tricky to make all that work. So what they tend to do on like the GT3 cars is they have like another like letterbox cut out in the bonnet with a portion that sticks down, and then as you pull the bonnet down, that like slots into here and seals it all off. So that's going to be, again, one of the next jobs. There's still loads of work to do on this car. Obviously now we've got a radiator and intercooler on it, and this rear scoop, a manifold and a turbo sat in here. It looks like, there's quite a lot of progress been made, and there's hours and hours and hours in all the fabrication for this, but there's still so much more to do. When everything is just custom, everything's one-off, you're only ever making one of something, you'd think it was actually quicker to make it, but a lot of the time it takes more time, because there's so many other things to think about with this. This is so far from what a normal Astra engine bay would look like. So again, we're kind of making it up as we go along, but also trying to plan for how things are going to be in the future. So one of the things we've kind of decided is that rather than running the boost pipe around the engine, we're going to run it straight over the top. If we go from here, we'll have like one quick release coupler here, and then one quick release coupler just for the top hat, and that more or less like straight lines it, and then the 90-degree down into there. And obviously because we've lowered the engine, we can have a much longer radius bend on the top of the throttle body there, which is obviously better for flow. That's what this whole thing's been about, really. Been about just trying to make something like super efficient, not working around the constraints of we've got a standard type radiator and a standard type turbo setup or a standard position. We can try and make everything as short as possible. One of the beauties of the long runner manifold is, lower EGTs so that the turbo can be more efficient, and shorter boost pipes so that the boost pressure side can be more efficient. The more efficient we make this car work, the less you'll have to drive it to get results out of it. And because you're not having to drive it quite as hard, you don't need as much power. It should be more reliable. And that's, I think, probably one of the issues that a lot of people have in Time Attack and those all kinds of racing series is kind of unreliable cars, and it's a lot of the time because the cars are being driven within an inch of their life, so they kind of do fail, they do go wrong. But then if you take the kind of ethos of touring cars and GT3 and all those kinds of circuit racing, they overbuild the cars massively. The cars are built to be efficient. Again, look at the 24-hour cars. Those cars race around for 24 hours, and they do go wrong, but almost all the time, so most of the time they don't. So if they can do it, obviously they've got a bit of a bigger budget than us, but if they can do it, it can be done. So we can make something that is ultimately reliable and doesn't go wrong. that's what we're trying to do. Make something super efficient, make something different and fun. And I think it's definitely starting to become that. It's now that we can visualise it a bit more, you kind of get over the wow, there's so much work to do, because you've got some of the main components in the engine bay now. So now it's just adding lots of little bits onto that until you get to the point where you can turn the key and fire it up and drive it down the road. Right, so as we were saying about running the boost pipes across the top of the engine, if we've already got some bits tacked together here. If we put that in the side there, I think we had it mocked up something roughly. No, it must have been the other way around. Something like this. It's again, in terms of trying to keep things as efficient and as possible, it doesn't necessarily make sense to run the boost pipe around the side of the engine. There's no reason why we can't put it across the top of the engine. So I'd imagine it'll end up something like that. And then running across the top, and probably another bend in it here, and then towards the top hat, which will obviously turn to face the intercooler end tank, and we'll obviously fabricate a new top hat. Again, it just keeps things as efficient as possible and as short as possible. And then at some point we've got the race port to put on there. So you would want this as close to the turbo as possible, but space is going to be really tight on this side. There's a possibility we could kind of put it over here, right on the side of the turbo, but I think it's most likely going to end up going on the side here. That's probably where it's going to go. Again, it would want to be as close to turbo as possible, but realistically, it's not going to make that much difference. So yeah, it'll probably end up on this side. Another advantage of running the boost pipes across the top of the engine bay is it opens up all of this space here. We've got a header tank to get in. We've got to remount the ECU. We're going to need engine breather tank, gearbox breather tank. So again, opening up this space here, it might only seem like a small boost pipe, but it actually does make quite a big difference. So yeah, that's another advantage of opening up this space. It means we can get the header tank in probably a better position than it would have been before. So probably have the header tank up here and then the ECU mounted down here. And then on the near side boost pipe, so kind of like pre-intercooler, again, this is where we talk about it's quite tight. I would have liked to have kept the boost pressure outlet pointing up, because then we could have just 90-degreed it off straight down into the intercooler. The only issue is with these compressor covers, they actually get bigger as they come around towards the exit. As you can see here, we're already quite tight onto the back of this scoop. So if I rotate that around any more, it starts to touch it because it gets bigger. So again, this was like a little bit of a kind of compromise, not really a compromise as such, just you decide to go one way or the other. I decided to keep the scoop as big as possible and then run the boost pipe around this way. So it's going to be a case of two small bends welded together and then out into the intercooler that way, and we'll have some kind of quick release fitting here, and that's probably all going to be welded directly to the turbo. So it's going to be kind of it's going to come back on itself and then out into the intercooler here. It would have been a bit better if we could have got it straight out the top of the turbo, but it's just one of them things. I was at this point quite conscious of the fact that obviously this is the air coming out of the intercooler as well at this point. So we want to try and keep this area as wide as possible. We don't want it to end up becoming a source of drag. So again, this is where it comes down to hitting and hoping, really. I don't think this isn't really going to be that much of a compromise on the boost pipes, but if we'd have made this smaller, that might have actually started to become a bit of a compromise. So yeah, next job is to start fabricating some boost pipes, finish off this upper intercooler mount, yeah, and whatever else we get on with. So thank you very much for watching. If you like the video, please give us a thumbs up, leave a comment if there's anything you want to know or anything you can suggest, any cool crazy ideas that I can make Warren pay for. Bang it in the comments and we'll see what you come up with. Thanks for watching.